14,200 years ago, someone spent weeks cleaning up after a dying puppy. We know because its teeth kept the record. 3 separate times its growth just stopped cold. At 19 weeks old, at 21, at 23, distemper, the researchers think. Nothing that small survives 3 rounds of that on its own. Someone carried it, kept it warm, cleaned up the vomit and the diarrhea for weeks. It was roughly 6 or 7 months old. It had never hunted, never guarded, never pulled anything. The people who excavated it wrote that it cannot have held any utilitarian use to humans. They buried it anyway with 2 of their own dead. You have done a smaller version of this. So why is it easier to sit up all night with an animal than with an adult who could actually tell you what's wrong? The comfortable explanation is that we went soft. That crying over a dog is a modern indulgence, something you can afford once nothing is trying to kill you. Hold that up against the grave in Western Germany. It is the oldest dog burial anyone has ever found, before farming, before any other animal was domesticated, while every single person alive was still hunting and gathering for a living. 2 people were in that grave, an older man and a woman of about 25, closely related, and laid in with them a puppy that had cost them weeks of round-the-clock care and would never pay a day of it back. Someone had set grave goods around it, a carved sculpture of an animal's head. A pin made of bone. This is not the behavior of people who had gone soft. Nothing had gotten easy yet. And it is not one grave. 7,000 years later, 1,000 kilometers north in what is now southern Sweden, a community was burying dogs the same way it buried people. More than a dozen of them. At least 5 were sprinkled with red ochre, the exact treatment human bodies got. One was laid out with a red deer antler along its spine, a decorated antler hammer at its chest, and flint blades set at its hip, grave goods as elaborate as the ones given to a person. The archaeologist who dug it up didn't reach for a soft word. He called it a symbolism that seems to have applied to humans and dogs alike. 2 sites, 7,000 years apart, that never heard of each other. The same idea, twice. Here is the part that should have made it simple and instead makes it stranger. At that same Swedish site, not every dog got the ochre and the antler. Some were killed, decapitated, dismembered. A few were thrown into human graves, apparently to stand in for people the sea had taken and never given back. Same community, same few centuries, same animal, and no rule you can see for which dog ended up honored and which one ended up a substitute. Something was sorting them one at a time, and it plainly wasn't the species, because the species was identical. So, they just loved dogs is already dead. Whatever was doing the sorting was reading something narrower than that. The obvious answer is work. Dogs earned their place. They hunted, they guarded, they hauled, so of course a useful animal got a good send-off. It's a clean theory, and the puppy in the German grave takes it apart. 6 or 7 months old. It had never hunted, never guarded. Never pulled a sled or warned of anything. Then it caught something like distemper and got nursed through 3 separate bouts of it, warm and clean, for weeks, by people who could not have expected it to survive and got nothing if it did. The excavators put it flatly. The dog cannot have held any utilitarian use to humans. Whatever bought that animal weeks of somebody's life, it wasn't earning its keep. So the question stops being about the dogs at all. The question is about us, not why did they love dogs, but what does a dog trip in a human being that a grown adult doesn't? And the answer starts with how human care is switched on in the first place. In the world we evolved in, a baby wasn't raised by its mother alone. It was carried, fed, and watched by aunts, older sisters, grandmothers, other women in the band, people who weren't always its parents. A caregiving system that stopped to verify kinship before it helped would have been far too slow to keep an infant alive, so it never checked. It learned to fire on a handful of cues instead. A flat little face, oversized eyes, clumsiness, a cry pitched in a certain range. Show a human brain that specific shape and the care comes up on its own. Researchers call it the baby schema, and in the lab it lights up the reward centers of women who have never had a child at all. It runs regardless of whose baby it is, which means it was never really guarding a gate. It was reading a shape, and anything built in that shape can walk straight through. A dog, by pure accident of its face, is built in exactly that shape. It qualifies. But qualifying explains the warmth. It doesn't yet explain the asymmetry, why the dog can get the grief the human next to you doesn't. For that, one more thing about how we read a mind. We size up any mind on 2 separate scales: how much it can do and how much it can feel. The doing draws blame. The feeling draws protection. A dog, like a baby, is almost pure feeling and almost no doing. It can suffer, but it can't be held responsible for anything, so it is impossible to blame. An adult human runs both scales at once. And the moment there's capacity to have done something, a second question opens under the sympathy, one a puppy never faces. What did they do? What did they choose? Couldn't they have handled this themselves? The adult isn't loved less. Their pain gets routed through a circuit that also weighs fault. The puppy's pain never does. The capable adult, just by looking capable, has quietly disqualified themselves from the one channel that asks no questions. You can watch this play out on people who have never heard any of it. Handed a moral dilemma, 46% of people said they'd save their own dog over a human stranger. In a national survey last year, 1 in 5 named a pet's death as the single most distressing loss of their life, and the prolonged grief that follows losing a dog came out statistically level with losing a friend or a sibling. In another study, people read identical reports of a beating and rated their distress. It fell in a clean order: infant first, then puppy, then adult dog, and the adult human dead last. The researchers' own conclusion wasn't that we love animals more. It was that the sorting runs on age and helplessness, not species, which is the whole thing in one line. None of this means the dog wins. In that same survey, 4 out of 5 people still named a human being as their hardest loss. The circuit can be hijacked. It doesn't switch sides. It's just that the circuit was tuned for a camp of a few dozen familiar faces, where nearly everyone who qualified as helpless was an actual infant. Now it runs in a world crowded with capable adults who've disqualified themselves, and the one creature still shaped exactly like the thing it was built to protect is asleep on your floor. So the grief you'll feel for that animal one day isn't a smaller, softer version of the grief you keep for people. It's the older one, the original circuit built for the utterly helpless, still doing the exact job it was made for. It was always going to be easier to sit up all night with the dog than with the capable adult who could actually tell you what's wrong. Not because the animal means more to you, because it never stopped qualifying as something to protect. And somewhere along the way, without deciding to, without ever being asked, the adult did.